Hi, I'm Michael Salamon from Lousy, and this is a quick tip on the Gestalt principle of closure. So the really underlying principle is that when confronted with a bunch of visual complex elements, users tend to look for very simplistic shapes that they've had previous experience with. The degree to which the effects work is inversely proportionate to the difficulty one has in reading it, meaning you try to break up your spacing into a shape that users can understand versus too big of a gap, therefore closure will not be effective. 1912, Dr. Max Wertheimer started the Gestalt School of Psychology, where he was interested in how humans perceive complex visual arrangements, where we can read the figure, the important elements, from the background or the ground, the relationship between the two, thus identifying the content that should be read and consumed from the elements that are merely structural or architectural. Closure is a visual example of what happens when an element has a big gap in it that your brain wants to fill in. For instance, in these two examples, you'll see the bowl, which is read visually as almost an entire sphere, even though there's a huge gap in it, and the box, which even though there's a large gap in the middle of it, you still perceive as a whole. Both of these elements are read off of the background and more focused on the foreground because of the perception that this element entails a physical manifestation of weight, even though it's really an outline. The bowl tends to want to roll over or fill in. The box tends to want to be encapsulated. Even though there's a visual gap between the two, your brain will fill in that space and perceive it as a whole. When combined with symmetry, you have a really amazing multiplier. Symmetry is something that humans love, and because of the symmetrical design of the elements, you will perceive them as a whole, meaning it's physically impossible for you to read visual column 2 and 4 as anything but background, even though the same space is separated between each of the components. The symmetrical nature of the shapes forces you to read them as a whole, even though they are equidistant spaces throughout the grid. It'll allow your users to see this element as a contained box, reading each piece as a unit versus two separate pieces. Symmetry facilitates grouping, and enclosure allows those groups to be read as a whole. Enclosure is so powerful that I'm able to force you to read like elements as different depending on the box I draw around them. Check out this example. Every circle in there is in the same position as the one next to it, meaning the image on the left and the image on the right, they are physically the same. The only difference is the enclosure. I've drawn a box around some of the guys on the left, and I've drawn a little lake around the guys on the right. The guys on the right seem different than the guys on the left, but if you look at their actual XY position, they haven't moved. You're perceiving it as a different group because of the enclosure that I have drawn around it. So, how would you use this on a website? Well, I can show you how not to use it. Every time you draw a box around something, you make an enclosure. The more enclosures that you've presented, the less background or figure that I see. All I end up seeing is the grid and the boxes, not the content that's inside it. Drawing an outline on something is one of the most powerful things you can do visually, especially from a Gestalt theory standpoint. But it is probably the easiest and most overused design technique in the world today. In fact, there are pages and pages and pages that are built with more boxes on there than necessary. Look at this example. I can't see anything but a series of boxes. Boxes on boxes, content on boxes, type on enclosed boxes, cars inside boxes, 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 boxes. In fact, I can't see any of the content. All I can see is the enclosure. So please take great care when using this technique. It is very powerful and can destroy any of your good intentions. The Gestalt principle of closure is a pretty easy thing to understand. All you really have to remember is that humans like symmetry, and we're really, really good at pattern recognition. The minute you break either of those, you cause cognitive dissonance and you require me to do the mental effort of trying to figure out what it is you're actually trying to say. And on a presentation where I'm trying to do something and get something done, I don't have time to waste figuring out what you were trying to say. If you're interested in more information about this, there's plenty of books out there. I've got 3 or 4 examples on the slide below. Andy Routledge has an amazing set of content devoted just to the concepts of Gestalt theory. I highly encourage you to follow up with him if you're interested in more. I hope this helps your design attempts. I hope you understand how to use the formulaic building blocks of the Gestalt psychology that's happening behind your user's eyes, whether they like it or not. I'm Michael Salamon from Lousy, and I encourage you to keep designing.